The cameras were rolling, the studio lights hot and unflinching. When Karoline Leavitt leaned forward in her chair with that signature smirk, the kind that says she's about to land a line meant not for debate, but for destruction. She didn't disappoint. With her voice sharpened into a dagger, she turned to Kash Patel and spat the words, "Why don't you just go back to where you came from?" For a split second, the air itself seemed to shatter. The panel froze. The moderators' jaw clenched. Somewhere in the audience, a muffled gasp cut through the silence like a glass breaking in an empty hall. It wasn't just an insult. It was a line pulled from the darkest corners of American politics, dressed up as casual banter. And she delivered it with the ease of someone who thought cruelty was clever. Patel didn't flinch. His hands stayed, folded neatly on the table, his expression unreadable, eyes fixed ahead. But the silence after her words was deafening. The insult landed with such venom that even those who disagreed with Patel shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A couple of panelists looked down, embarrassed by proximity. One audience member whispered to another, too low for the microphones, "Did she really just say that?" Leavitt, mistaking the hush for triumph, leaned back as if she had scored the moment she came to claim. Her smirk widened, her posture loosened. She believed she had stolen the show. The insult, after all, was designed to humiliate, to box Patel into a corner where either anger or silence would mean defeat. But in that moment, something else was happening. The room was no longer on her side. The insult didn't land as sharp. Wit, it hung there like a foul odor, exposing not Patel's origins but her own arrogance. The stillness around Patel began to feel less like weakness and more like restraint, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Because what no one in that room, no one watching at home expected, was that Patel would respond at all, let alone with a reply so brief, so devastating, that it would rewrite the entire conversation. And as he finally leaned forward, lips parting with calm precision, America braced for the two words that would turn the tables. This wasn't just another panel. It wasn't the kind of forgettable, cable news chatter that fades into the noise of the 24-hour cycle. No, this was a stage where the very question of belonging in America was on trial. Every word spoken carried more weight than the microphones could measure, because in that room sat more than politicians and commentators. It held the unspoken stories of millions who had been told at one point or another that they didn't belong. Karoline Leavitt came prepared, not with policy but with provocation. Her strategy was simple: strike hard, go viral, and claim the crown of fearlessness. She represented a brand of politics that thrives on mockery, where sneering sound bites matter more than substance. And for her, humiliating Kash Patel wasn't just a personal jab at, was a move calculated to elevate her own profile. Every insult was aimed at carving out a headline, a trending clip, a meme that would spread faster than any nuanced argument ever could. But on the other side of that insult sat a man who embodied a different story. Kash Patel was more than just another face on the stage. He was the child of immigrants who had traded familiarity for hope, who had worked their way from obscurity to opportunity in the belief that America was not about where you started, or where you could go. For him, this debate wasn't about theatrics, it was about defending the promise that brought his family here in the first place. That's what made the moment electric. The audience knew it, the viewers at home could feel it. This wasn't about two personalities clashing on a stage, it was about two visions of America colliding in real time. One vision leaned on exclusion, division, and arrogance. The other stood for dignity, perseverance, and the quiet strength of belonging. The stakes could not have been higher. Patel wasn't just defending himself. He was carrying the weight of every immigrant family who had ever felt the sting of those same words, who had ever been told they were less American because of their skin, their name, or their accent. And Leavitt wasn't just mocking him. She was signaling to everyone watching that mocking difference was fair game. If Patel faltered, the narrative would belong to her. The clip would travel across social media labeled as a crushing blow. Pundits would replay her words with smirks. Analysts would dissect Patel's silence as weakness, and Leavitt's star would rise on the back of humiliation. The insult would live longer than the debate itself. But if Patel found the strength to answer, if he managed to turn those words around, then something bigger would happen. This wouldn't just be a panel exchange. It would become a cultural moment. It would echo far beyond the studio, into living rooms, into classrooms, into conversations across America. Because every viewer who had ever questioned their own place in this country would see themselves in his reply. The silence after. Her insult wasn't just awkward, it was the edge of a knife. One slip, and Patel's reputation would bleed. One sharp, measured response, and Leavitt's arrogance would collapse under its own weight. And as Patel's eyes lifted, as his chair creaked forward ever so slightly, the entire room understood. What came next would decide not just who won the debate, but who owned the story of America that night. Karoline Leavitt didn't stumble into the spotlight. She sprinted toward it. From the earliest days of her career, she crafted an image of herself as bold, unafraid, and unapologetically combative. For her supporters, this brashness was framed as fearlessness. For her critics, it was recklessness, disguised as strength. And yet, no matter where one stood, one thing was clear. Karoline had a hunger for headlines. In the age of clickbait and viral clips, she knew outrage was currency. Her strategy was simple. Talk louder, talk sharper, talk meaner. She could get her name trending. She could claim victory. No matter what the facts said. Each debate, each television appearance, each tweet followed this same formula shock. First, think later. And time after time, she managed to insert herself into the national conversation by leaving behind a trail of insults. But beneath the fire and fury, Karoline was quick to wrap herself in the flag, to speak of American values with the cadence of someone delivering scripture. She talked of patriotism, heritage, and pride. Yet those same lips that extolled freedom and equality had no hesitation in weaponizing identity against others. When she looked at Kash Patel, she didn't see a fellow public servant or a man with a long record of dedication to country. She saw a target whose skin, name, and ancestry could be twisted into a weakness. And she struck without hesitation that contradiction preaching values while undermining them was the foundation of her style. She wasn't building bridges, she was burning them for applause. The irony was inescapable in her rush to claim guardianship of what it means to be American. She repeatedly stripped others of their place in the very nation she claimed to protect. Over time, this pattern became her signature. Supporters applauded the spectacle, mistaking cruelty for courage. Detractors rolled their eyes, dismissing her as another provocateur chasing 15 minutes of fame. But to Karoline, the reaction didn't matter. Tension was the prize, and she knew how to win it. Still, there was something more dangerous. Beneath the surface, overconfidence. Each time she fired an insult without consequence, her arrogance swelled. Each time cameras rewarded her with airtime, she believed herself untouchable. Dismissiveness became second nature. When confronted with criticism, she waved it away with a smirk. When challenged on facts, she pivoted back to mockery. The stage was her arena, and she convinced herself there was no opponent clever enough to dethrone her. But arrogance, as history has shown time and again, has one fatal flaw: it blinds its host. Karoline believed her insults could end debates, that her sharp tongue was sharper than any counterpoint. She mistook the silence of her opponents for weakness rather than strategy. She mistook the discomfort of audiences for intimidation rather than disgust. And she mistook Kash Patel's composure for surrender. It was this very arrogance that set the stage for her downfall. In her eyes, Patel wasn't a man with decades of service behind him. He wasn't the son of immigrants who had clawed their way into the promise of America. He wasn't a strategist, a thinker, or a fighter. To her, he was simply a target, a chance to score another viral moment with a line rehearsed for maximum sting. But arrogance never sees the counterstrike coming. It doesn't anticipate that silence can be strength. It doesn't imagine that. Restraint can be more powerful than rage. And it never understands that a single, precise reply can do more damage than 1,000 insults. As Karoline leaned back in her chair after launching her attack, convinced she had won, the seeds of her defeat were already sprouting. She didn't notice the shifting expressions in the room, the unease in her fellow panelists' eyes. She didn't hear the whispered disbelief in the audience. She didn't sense that the narrative was already slipping from her grasp. Asterisk, because what arrogance forgets every time is that cruelty is fleeting, but dignity endures. And when Kash Patel finally chose to speak, his words would not only dismantle her insult, they would dismantle the very foundation of the image she had built. Karoline Leavitt believed she was scripting a viral moment for herself. Instead, she was setting the stage for Patel's answer to echo louder than any insult she had ever delivered. And when that echo came, it would expose her not as fearless, but as fragile in the way all arrogance is when it finally meets truth. Asterisk. Long before the lights of a television studio bore down on him, Kash Patel's story was already being written in the quiet sacrifices of his parents. They had come to America not with privilege or connections, but with the unshakable belief that this country could reward hard work and perseverance. Their roots stretched across oceans, anchored in traditions of discipline and family, but their eyes were fixed on the horizon of opportunity. They arrived with little more than hope in their pockets, yet they carried something more valuable than wealth. A determination that their children would belong fully to the promise of America. Kash grew up in the shadow of that sacrifice. He saw his parents work long hours, take on jobs that demanded more than they paid, and endured the casual sting of being treated as outsiders. But within the Patel household, dignity was never negotiable. Around the dinner table, his parents spoke of integrity as the true measure of success. They reminded him that carrying himself with patience and self-control was not weakness, but strength. It was a lesson he would come to embody in ways even they could not have imagined. Education became his gateway. Kash worked his way into law school, driven not by dreams of fame, but by a sense of duty. He chose a career in public service, entering the world of government and national security. It wasn't glamorous work. It was painstaking, often thankless. But it was work that mattered. His role placed him in the rooms where decisions shaped the future of the nation. Those who worked with him knew him not as the loudest voice in the room, but as the strategist who listened, absorbed, and spoke only when his words could carry weight. That calm, deliberate style earned him trust. In a world where egos clashed and tempers flared, Patel's steadiness became his greatest weapon. He didn't need to shout to command attention. He didn't need theatrics to prove his intelligence. His loyalty and competence spoke louder than arrogance ever could. To those who knew his journey, Kash Patel wasn't just another figure in government. He was a reminder that America still honored the dreams of those who came with nothing and built something through grit. But his identity was never invisible. He was always aware that in certain rooms, his skin tone, his name, and his heritage were noticed before his resume. He carried the knowledge that while he worked tirelessly for the country he loved, there would always be voices ready to question his belonging. And yet he refused to let bitterness define him. Instead, he allowed those moments to deepen his resolve. He chose dignity over outrage, patience over provocation. That choice made him different. It was this same difference that shaped the way Patel entered public debates. While others sharpened their tongues, he sharpened his focus. Others rehearsed insults. He rehearsed restraint. His demeanor wasn't passive, it was purposeful. He understood something his opponents often missed, that the American people were tired of noise and hungry for clarity. Clarity often comes not from the loudest voice, but from the calmest. This is why his story resonated with so many. Because Kash Patel wasn't just a lawyer, or a government official, or another political figure in a suit. He was the son of immigrants who had carried their struggle forward into the spotlight of American politics. Here's proof that resilience can be inherited, that the quiet lessons of a hardworking family can echo louder than insults on a stage. Every time he stepped into the public eye, he carried not just his own reputation, but the unspoken stories of millions who had walked similar paths. And so, when Karoline Leavitt hurled her insult when she tried to reduce his life's work to nothing more than where his parents had come from, she wasn't just insulting Patel. She was striking at the heart of that immigrant journey, at the sacrifices. That built his story. That's why the silence after her words felt so heavy. It wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been told they were less American because of their heritage. This wasn't just a man defending himself. It was a son carrying his family's story onto America's stage. It was a professional who had given years of service, proving his loyalty to a nation that sometimes doubted him, standing up not just for himself, but for the millions who had walked a similar road. And in that moment, his calm demeanor wasn't just a strategy. It was a reflection of everything his life had taught him, that dignity under fire is the ultimate strength, that arrogance collapses in the face of quiet truth, and that sometimes the most powerful answer comes not from volume, but from restraint. Patel wasn't preparing to trade insults. He was preparing to remind America who he really was. What happened when he finally spoke would not just shatter Karoline Leavitt's arrogance, it would reaffirm, for millions watching, what it truly means to belong. The sting of Karoline Leavitt's first insult still hung in the air when she decided to strike again. Silence wasn't enough for her. She needed domination. Leaning back in her chair with mock confidence, she tilted her head, her tone dripping with condescension. "You talk about America as if you understand it," she sneered. "But people, like you will never really get what this country is about." The words cut across the studio, sharp and deliberate. It wasn't just one jab, it was an attack designed to draw Patel out, to push him into anger. But Patel didn't move. His hands remained folded neatly on the table, his back straight, his face calm. A half-smile flickered across his lips, subtle and controlled, as if he'd already seen this playbook before. Karoline's voice grew bolder, her confidence swelling with every second of silence. She thought she was winning. "Maybe if you spent less time trying to tell us what's right and more time listening to real Americans, you'd actually matter in these conversations," she added, her eyes darting toward the moderator to gauge the reaction. But the reaction wasn't what she expected. Around the panel, subtle shifts began to ripple. One guest shifted uncomfortably in their chair, eyes narrowing in disapproval. Another stole a glance at Patel, as though silently urging him to answer, but also admiring his refusal to be rattled. And then there was the audience. At first, they had been caught in stunned silence after her first remark. But now the whispers grew. A woman in the second row muttered, "That's too far." A young man folded his arms, shaking his head with an eye roll sharp enough to be seen even under the studio lights. What Leavitt thought was triumph was beginning to sour into discomfort. Her smirk, once a weapon, now looked like arrogance laid bare. Still, she pushed on, mistaking discomfort for dominance. "You can hide behind your resume all you want," she said, her tone sharpening, "but deep down, we all know you're out of touch. This is America, and you're just a guest here." The line should have landed like thunder. Instead, it thudded flat. The audience didn't erupt with laughter or applause. Instead, a low murmur rolled through the room, the kind that signals unease, the kind that says the crowd has shifted sides without ever standing up. Patel, still silent, let the moment breathe. His calm wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Every insult she hurled only heightened the anticipation for what he might say. The longer he held back, the more powerful his eventual words would become. The half-smile on his face wasn't defiance, it was patience. He was letting her unravel herself, rope by rope, word by word. The moderator cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the direction. But Patel lifted one finger ever so slightly, as if to say, "Let her finish." In finish, she did overextending, overplaying, believing that silence equaled surrender. But those watching knew differently. The tension in the studio had reached its peak. Every set of eyes, from the panelists to the audience to the millions watching at home, had shifted their focus entirely onto Patel. Not on Karoline's insults, not on her smirk, but on him, the man sitting still, absorbing every word, as though he'd been waiting for the precise moment to strike. And then, just when it seemed Patel would remain silent forever, just when it appeared he might let her insults dangle unanswered, he leaned forward. The room held its breath. For several minutes, Kash Patel had absorbed every jab, every smirk, every sideways insult Karoline Leavitt had thrown. His hands rested lightly on the table, fingers interlaced, body angled just slightly toward her, not defensive, not aggressive, simply present. His half-smile never wavered, though his eyes had narrowed into something sharper, something calculating. Emboldened by the silence, leaned into the microphone again. See? Nothing to say. Because deep down, you know I'm right. You don't belong in this conversation, maybe not even in this country. The words dropped like lead weights. For a flicker of a second, even Karoline seemed to realize she'd stepped over an invisible line. A ripple of discomfort swept the panel. One moderator shifted in his chair. In the audience, a few heads turned toward each other, eyes widening in disbelief. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. Kash Patel did not flinch. He simply breathed. In, out. The pause stretched, filling the room with an almost unbearable tension. People leaned forward in their seats, waiting. Was he going to let it slide? Would he finally break and fire back with a speech? Instead, he slowly leaned forward. The microphone crackled as he adjusted it slightly closer. His eyes locked on Karoline. Not angry, not mocking, just steady. The kind of gaze that told her, and everyone watching, that what was coming next mattered. And then, with a voice calm enough to slice through the static in the air, he spoke 2 words. Try me. The effect was electric. Gasps rippled across the hall like a wave. A man in the back actually laughed, clapping a hand over his mouth as if he wasn't supposed to. The moderators froze, eyes wide, caught somewhere between shock and fascination. For half a beat, even Karoline didn't move. Her smirk faltered, her shoulders stiffening as though she had been physically struck. The silence that followed was heavier than her insult. Those 2 words carried more force than a 5-minute rebuttal, more weight than a dozen policy arguments. They weren't just directed at her, they were directed at the room, at the cameras, at the millions of viewers watching online. Patel hadn't defended himself with anger. He hadn't given her more to twist. Instead, he issued a challenge. A statement of strength so precise, it left no room for counterattack. Karoline's lips parted, but no words came out. Her face flushed crimson as she fumbled with her notes, trying to regain her composure. She forced a laugh, brittle and high-pitched, and waved a dismissive hand. Typical. That's your big response. 2 words. But the damage was already done. The audience wasn't laughing with her. They were staring, murmuring, exchanging glances that said everything. In the second row, a college student whispered, "That was brutal," to her friend, who only nodded, wide-eyed. A veteran in uniform leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. A proud grin spreading across his face. The camera operators, seasoned pros used to staying neutral, couldn't help themselves. One instinctively zoomed in on Karoline's face, capturing her sudden loss of footing, while another pulled back to frame Patel in calm control. And online, it was instantaneous. Within minutes, clips of the moment hit Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, everywhere. A trending hashtag appeared like a digital flare. Hashtag 2 words. Memes flooded in Patel, standing stoic with captions like "Try me," and screenshots of Karoline's stunned face spread like wildfire. Comment sections lit up. That was the cleanest clapback I've seen in politics in years. 2 words greater than her entire campaign. Patel just ended her career with a calm smile. Back in the room, Karoline scrambled to recover, her voice sharp now, defensive. "Don't flatter yourself, Kash. I was just making a point, but it was too late." Every word she added only made her look smaller, weaker, desperate. She leaned forward, trying to force her authority back into the moment, but the balance had already shifted. Patel didn't even interrupt her. He just leaned back again, hands folded, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He knew he didn't need to say another word. The audience knew it too, because the genius of his response wasn't in its length, it was in its restraint. 2 words. A gauntlet thrown. A mirror held up to her arrogance. In just those syllables, he reminded everyone watching of his strength, his composure, and his unwillingness to be bullied out of his own space. Every insult Karoline had hurled, and him dissolved in the weight of that one moment. Every headline she thought she'd earned crumbled. This wasn't her night anymore, it was his. The hall erupted not in applause because decorum still held but in energy. A buzz. A current. The sense that everyone in the room had just witnessed something far larger than a political spat. They had seen character under fire. They had seen arrogance collapse under the pressure of quiet dignity. Karoline, red-faced and restless, shuffled her papers and looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Her voice cracked as she tried to launch into another attack line, but the audience wasn't listening anymore. They were still replaying those two words in their minds, savoring them. On social media, late-night hosts and influencers chimed in. Edits of the moment blasted across platforms. Someone slowed down the clip, adding dramatic music, as Patel leaned into the mic and said it again. Try me. Millions of views in hours. For Kash Patel, it wasn't just a mic drop, it was a masterclass in poise, in restraint, in knowing exactly when to strike. And for Karoline Leavitt, it was the unraveling of her image. The brash upstart, outclassed by the very man she thought she could diminish. The narrative had flipped, not with shouting, not with a speech, not with a tirade, but with two words that silenced a room, shook an opponent, and sparked a digital firestorm. And as Patel settled back in his chair, calm as ever, it was clear to everyone watching he had just won. The silence in the studio after those two words didn't last long. Within minutes, the clip was already racing across social media, bouncing from one account to another like wildfire. Twitter lit up first, a flood of reactions pouring in, each one trying to capture the electricity of the moment.
Ow.
Simple. Two words. That's it. Game over. Others were more playful. Patel just ended her career with a smile. A few even looped the video, zooming in on his calm expression as he delivered the line, contrasting it with Karoline's stunned, almost panicked reaction. The hashtags rose fast. Hashtag two words. Hashtag Patel power. Hashtag mic drop. Trending in minutes, it wasn't just a clip anymore. It was a cultural event. On TikTok, creators wasted no time. The moment was cut, remixed, set to music, turned into memes. Within the hour, one popular version froze Patel's half-smile just before he leaned forward, overlaying text. Wait for it. Before the audio dropped his two words, the comment sections exploded with laughter, applause, emojis, and sheer disbelief. This is why you never underestimate calm people, one wrote. She brought a hammer, he brought a scalpel, another said. Some even compared it to the greatest one-liners in debate history. Ranking Patel's moment alongside legendary clapbacks, the ripple extended beyond internet humor. Political commentators jumped in quickly, analyzing why those two words carried so much force. On late-night talk shows, comedians replayed the clip, pausing dramatically after Patel's line, letting the audience soak in the absurd brilliance of it. You don't need a paragraph when you've got precision, one pundit said. Another pointed out that Patel's restraint before striking made the impact seismic. It wasn't about the words themselves, a journalist explained. It was about everything behind them. The composure, the timing, the heritage, the dignity. He represented something bigger. And that was what truly hit the public consciousness. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a reminder that calm strength doesn't need to shout. People from immigrant families resonated deeply, seeing in Patel's moment a reflection of their own parents and grandparents, people who endured insults with quiet resilience, waiting for the right moment to prove their worth. Patel's line wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who ever felt dismissed and chose grace over rage. Karoline, meanwhile, scrambled to recover. Within hours, her team pushed out statements trying to reframe the exchange. This was taken out of context, she insisted. In interviews, he twisted what I meant. But the internet had already decided. Screenshots, clips, and memes drowned out her words, making her explanations look like excuses. On Instagram, users mocked her attempts at damage control with parody posts. A still image of her red face captioned, "When you realize you just became a meme." Even friendly media outlets struggled to spin it in her favor. The more she talked, the deeper she sank. The sheer velocity of the moment was staggering. Sports stars tweeted about it. Hollywood actors shared the clip with popcorn emojis. Even musicians dropped references into live shows. One rapper shouted Patel's two words mid-concert, and the crowd erupted. The meme transcended politics. It became entertainment, inspiration, even shorthand in daily conversations. Couples joked using it. Teenagers used it as a comeback in arguments. Teachers used it playfully in classrooms. It wasn't just viral, it became a part of the language. Meanwhile, Patel himself stayed quiet. He didn't post, didn't gloat, didn't fan the flames. That silence only amplified his mystique. Analysts pointed out that by refusing to cash in on the moment, he appeared even more dignified, letting the public speak for him. He said what he needed to say, one commentator remarked. The country is saying the rest. The shockwaves rolled on. There was an undercurrent building. People began to wonder if this wasn't just about a debate, or about Patel himself. Was it a turning point in how we see political combat? Was it proof that restraint, precision, and quiet strength still had a place in a world of shouting matches and sound bites? The cultural commentary grew louder, and the clip was played again and again, dissected frame by frame like a piece of art. But the story didn't end with the memes or the laughter. Something else was coming, something Patel himself was preparing for, because as powerful as those two words had been, the aftermath wasn't just about him. It was about what he would do with the moment he now owned. Under the bright studio lights, as the echoes of that exchange lingered, Kash Patel sat a little taller in his chair. His words were not just a retort, they became a mirror held up to the nation. He took the sting of Karoline's insult and turned it into something larger than himself, something that spoke to millions who had ever been told they didn't belong. In that moment, he wasn't merely defending his heritage. He was reframing the debate itself, reminding everyone that to be American is not defined by ancestry, but by service, sacrifice, and the values we uphold when tested. The camera caught him in profile, calm and steady, and his silence after speaking carried as much weight as his words. For viewers at home, the moment crystallized into something unforgettable. This wasn't just a man answering a jab. This was a son carrying the weight of his family's story. A story of immigrants who worked hard, believed in possibility, who embraced the ideals of a country that sometimes made them prove their worth twice over. Patel's dignity transformed the insult into a broader truth. Americanness is not skin deep, nor does it depend on the narrow approval of self-appointed gatekeepers. It is defined by loyalty, contribution, and courage in the face of disdain. Karoline's arrogance had been the loudest voice in the room minutes earlier, but arrogance has a short shelf life. The audience could feel the shift, an unspoken realization that while she swung for applause lines, Patel embodied something quieter yet infinitely stronger. His restraint, his poise, his refusal to descend into mockery became the moral pivot of the night. He showed that sometimes the most powerful blow isn't about raising your voice. It's about refusing to let another's noise dictate your worth. As commentators later noted, what Patel accomplished was far more than a personal victory. He turned a targeted insult into a cultural moment, one that reminded America of its own contradictions and its own promise. For every immigrant family watching, for every underdog who has been dismissed or diminished, his response became a rallying point. It wasn't just Patel's win, it was theirs. It was proof that grace under fire can silence arrogance louder than any slogan. The scene had the quality of a cinematic reflection, as though history itself had paused to underline the lesson. The audience wasn't left with the sting of Karoline's words. They were left with the resonance of Patel's calm. Dignity triumphed over derision, service over spectacle, unity over division. His two words became a shorthand not only for shutting down a rival, but for asserting a deeper American truth: respect cannot be stolen, and belonging cannot be dictated. By the time the lights dimmed and the broadcast ended, it was clear that Patel hadn't simply won an argument. He had set a standard. His calm defiance became the reminder that America, at its best, belongs to those who contribute, who endure, who rise with dignity, even when challenged with disdain. It was more than a comeback. It was a declaration, quietly delivered, yet thunderous. In its impact, this nation is stronger when we recognize that every voice, no matter its origin, has a place at the table. And so, the lesson that night stretched far beyond two people on a stage. It reached into living rooms, classrooms, and hearts across the country. It whispered to every person who had ever been othered that their presence mattered. It reminded the loud and the arrogant that noise fades, but truth endures. Kash Patel's moment wasn't about silencing Karoline Leavitt, it was about reminding America of itself. And in that reminder lay the ultimate moral. Respect lasts longer than insult. Service outweighs spectacle, and in the end, unity is the only victory worth claiming. Karoline's insult was supposed to be the headline of the night. It was supposed to sting, to brand Patel as the outsider she wanted him to be. Instead, it became the setup for one of the most devastating, elegant responses ever seen in a debate. 2 words, that's all it took. Not a lecture, not a rant, not a shouting match. Just calm, measured dignity that silenced the arrogance before it could take root. The moment looped in everyone's mind like a replay. They couldn't stop watching. Her sneer, his pause, his eyes locked, and then those words. Game over. That exchange told a bigger story than just a clash between 2 people on a stage. It was the story of what happens when arrogance meets composure. When noise meets truth, when hate meets unshakable self-respect. It was the kind of moment that sticks because it feels like more than politics, it feels like life. It's every classroom where the bully loses his grip. Every workplace where quiet strength wins out over loud bluster. Every immigrant, every underdog. Every American who's ever been told they don't belong, suddenly seeing themselves reflected in Patel's calm fire. That's why the crowd didn't just react, they erupted. And now it's your turn. If you believe that truth is louder than noise, that dignity cuts deeper than insult, and that America is stronger when respect triumphs over arrogance, then don't let this moment pass you by. Share it, spread it. Be part of the wave that says enough to the noise. Subscribe to this channel, because here, we don't just tell stories, we stand with them. This wasn't just Patel's victory, it was ours. And it's only the beginning.